A mail-order bride was left at the station until a broken man found redemption in her baby's cry. The dust swirled in a relentless, choking cloud around Eleanor Vance's ankles as she stepped down from the stagecoach. It wasn't the genteel, golden dust of her New Orleans memories, but a coarse, angry red grit that coated her traveling dress and stung her eyes. The driver flicked his reins, the horses stamped, and the coachman's weary call, "Redwood Springs," fell dead against a town that seemed to listen only to itself. The oppressive silence, broken by the mournful creak of a windmill and the impatient snorts of the team, felt more menacing than the clamor of any city street. A small 6-year-old hand, clammy with fear, clutched hers. "Mama, where are we?" Josephine whispered, her voice a fragile thing against the wide, unforgiving sky. "Where we start again," Eleanor said, trying to make the words steady enough to carry. She tasted the lie thin as paper, bitter as old coffee. The truth was uglier, a ledger full of a dead man's promises, a seal pressed into wax like a bootprint on a throat, a home dangled like a carrot and snatched away by the same hand that offered it. She had not come west to start again. She had been chased. The town itself was a testament to its master. Every painted board seemed scabbed with a crude claim. "Property of S. Thorne." The sign above the saloon door had been repainted so many times the letters had a raised scar to them. Even the air felt like it belonged to him, heavy, impatient, collecting debts. The bank's door swung open, and with it came the sharp smell of ink and stale cigar smoke. A man stepped out in a too fine suit, already losing its war with the dust. His face was a roadmap of hard bargains, his eyes winter cold. He saw her the way a rancher sees a scrawny calf at auction. Weight, worth, trouble. Silas Thorne. A lazy, predatory grin crawled over his mouth. "Well, well, look what the wind blew in." His voice had gravel in it, and so did his smile. "The lovely Mrs. Vance. I didn't think you had the backbone to show." Eleanor drew Josephine behind her skirts and lifted her chin. "Mr. Thorne," she began, and the tremor in her voice made her furious with herself. "I've come to appeal to your reason. My husband's debt wasn't mine, and the house." "Reason?" He laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Reason left these parts with the last spring rain. Your husband was a fool. He bet on a phantom vein and lost. Now the bill is yours. That's how ink works." He reached a hand toward Josephine's cheek, casual as you please, and caught a palm across his knuckles for the effort. "Don't touch her," Eleanor hissed. Silas looked down at the red mark, amused. "Feisty. I like feisty. It burns hot and quick." He leaned in until she could count the pockmarks along his jaw. "The land is mine. The house. I might be persuaded to let you keep a roof if the right papers are signed." His breath was whiskey and rot. "I can be generous to you and your little secret." The word he didn't say was louder than the one he did. Bastard. The sound of it rippled through the empty street, as if the boards themselves were listening. "I'd rather burn my home to the ground," Eleanor said, voice shaking but true, "than stake it on your charity." Silas's smile never reached his eyes. "Have it your way. You've got till sundown to get your saint's answer together. Try to run, and the desert will deliver you back to my door, dry as parchment." He touched his hat brim, not in courtesy but possession, and strolled off toward the saloon, 2 men peeling off the shade to follow him like flies. Silence pressed in. The stagecoach rattled away. Eleanor stood in the empty street with a child, a trunk, and a heart too tired to carry itself. Tears came hot and uninvited, tracing dusty tracks. Josephine began to whimper, and Eleanor scooped her close, breathing her in soap and travel and the ghost of oranges from the station in San Antonio. The sun lowered, and the sky caught fire. Along the eastern road, a lone rider cut against the light, horse and hat and rifle slung easy, the silhouette of a man who'd been out where law thins to rumor. He slowed at the edge of town, watching the tableau. A woman, a child, a trunk, and the kind of quiet that screams. Kane Colton swung down, boots kissing dirt, spurs giving a restrained jingle that somehow didn't feel like swagger. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, and even the kind of voice you hand a bleeding day to. "You in some kind of trouble?" A dozen answers jostled in Eleanor's throat. She settled for the truest one. She gestured toward the bank, toward the town, toward all of it. "I've been left with nothing," she said. "My husband's debts, they sold them to a man who wants to sell me." Kane's jaw ticked, a small flash of iron beneath gentleness. He knew the name without asking. Thorn's kind had a smell to them that lawmen learned early. He looked at Eleanor's gloved hands, fine but work-worn, a lady who'd learned to be her own maid. He looked at Josephine, big eyes, tired shoulders. Children keep score with their bodies. Then he did what men like him do when a wrong looks back at them. "Name's Kane Colton. I'm the marshal," he said, as if that was a promise rather than a title. He held out his hand. The palm was calloused, the grip unthreatening. Eleanor hesitated a heartbeat and took it. Warmth bled across and steadied her just enough that she noticed the limp, a small hitch, worn smooth by years, that he covered with grace. War or horse, she thought, or both. "Where's your trunk?" he asked. "Here." She tried to lift a corner and nearly folded. Kane took Josephine first, gentle as a secret, then shouldered the trunk like a fault you decide to bear. The child went quiet against his chest almost instantly, listening to the drum of a heart that didn't race under pressure. "I can't pay for a room," Eleanor said as he steered them toward the boarding house, the shame rising like fever. "We'll talk to Mrs. Peterson," Kane said. "She's got a spine like a church beam and a heart to match." The way he said it made refusal feel ridiculous. The boarding house was a clapboard rectangle with flower boxes that had lived and died and lived again. Mrs. Peterson herself filled the doorway like a hymn. "Marshal," she said, taking in the scene with eyes that missed nothing. "Bring them in." Eleanor's room was small, clean, and the kind of quiet you can sleep inside. The bed sagged in the middle, as if it, too, had carried a lot of stories. Kane set the trunk down, shifted Josephine back to her mother with reluctant care, and tipped his hat to leave. In the hall, Eleanor heard him speak in the murmur men use when they're spending money that matters to them. "I'll cover it," he told Mrs. Peterson. "For now." It isn't charity," he said when Eleanor followed him out to protest. He watched her, really watched her, the way you study a sky for weather. "It's the right thing. For tonight, let that be enough." The right thing. The words loosened something knotted behind her ribs. She bowed her head, and for a second, just breathed. That night, Josephine slept like the dead do, and Eleanor, a woman who had learned to sleep with one ear open and one hand on a latch, slept in ragged loops, pulled up by dreams that were more memory than fear. In one, New Orleans rain, curtains breathing in and out, her husband's voice warm with promises and cold with lies. In another, the letter, big seal, bigger threat. In all of them, a door closing softly, final. Near dawn, she woke with the sense of being stared at, and found only the window looking back. The sky was a pale wound. She washed in cold water and buttoned hope into her bodice, one careful button at a time. Downstairs, the kitchen steamed with coffee and a loaf cooling on a rack. Mrs. Peterson hummed, flour on her cheeks like war paint. "You look like a woman who could eat a mountain," the landlady said, sliding a plate across. "And a girl who could eat a hill." Josephine dug into her bread with reverence. "Thank you," Eleanor said, and meant it with her whole body. "Marshall was in late," Mrs. Peterson said, as if they were discussing weather. "Sat on the porch and smoked like a man making up his mind not to do something foolish. He'll be back." Eleanor folded her hands around the notion the way you cup a candle in wind. "He doesn't owe me anything." "Good men think they owe everyone," Mrs. Peterson said. "It's their flaw and their charm." So. The door swung and there he was, morning shaved, hat in hand, eyes sharpened by sleep. "Ma'am," he said, and the word felt like a respectful arm around her shoulders. He tipped the brim to Josephine. "Miss." Josephine, solemn as a judge, returned the gesture with a crumb-sticky hand. Kane sat at the kitchen table like a man in a confessional. "I made some calls," he said. Out here calls were rides, knocks, glances that lasted a beat longer than polite. "Judge Wilcox will pretend he didn't sign what he signed. The sheriff over in Dry Hollow says Thorne's ledgers smell like rotten meat, but he won't touch 'em without a swarm of bees to back him. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. I can't promise you a legal miracle. Eleanor lifted her chin. I didn't ask for a miracle, only for a fair shake. Then here's fair, Kane said. You have a room here as long as I can keep pulling dollars out of my holster. Mrs. Peterson snorted and turned away to hide a smile. And a job if you want one. Mrs. Peterson will take on a hand who can cook and keep books. She's been doing both alone since Mr. Peterson went to God. And I'll put a word in at the schoolhouse about sewing and reading lessons. Folks pay in coins, eggs, and gratitude 2 of the 3 spend. Eleanor blinked. It was the first plan anyone had spoken to her that didn't end with a door or a bed she didn't choose. I can do sums and parts, she said, and stew and bread and mending. I'll earn my keep. Good, Kane said. Relief softened his shoulders, as if he'd been braced for her to refuse kindness out of pride. There's more. He laid a folded telegram on the table as carefully as a doctor sets down a scalpel. From New Orleans. The bank confirms transfer of your homestead's deed to Silas Thorne. The note says, irrevocable. That's a fancy word for, we got paid twice and mean to keep it. The room tilted, then righted. So it's done, Eleanor said. He owns the land, and he'll make owning me the dessert. Not if I can help it, Kane said. He spoke with a quiet ferocity that made Mrs. Peterson glance over with approval. But I need you to understand the lay. Thorne's got a grip on this town. Men owe him coin, favors, their shirts. He's a snake in a stew-pot. Touch anything, and you come up with him. Then you cut the head, Mrs. Peterson said. Kane's mouth tugged. I'm partial to catching them alive, he said. But I don't mind if they lose a few fangs first. Eleanor sipped coffee that tasted like courage. What do you need me to do? Nothing foolish, Kane said. Stay to daylight. Keep company. If Thorne approaches you, you tell me. If he sends anyone, you tell me. The law is slower than sin, but it gets there if you keep the path swept. Eleanor nodded. I won't be bait. You'll be a woman doing her work, Kane said. That's enough to shame a man who can be shamed. Silas Thorne can't, Mrs. Peterson muttered. Then we'll settle for stopping him, Kane said, standing. He left a coin on the table that Mrs. Peterson ignored with dignity, which made him tuck it into the bread box with a grin. I'll be on my rounds, he said to Eleanor. Holler if you need a storm. After he was gone, the kitchen felt bigger and smaller at once, as if someone had propped a door to the future but left a boot in it. The day found Eleanor work. She peeled potatoes and the first layer of shame. She scrubbed a pan and the second. She taught Josephine to shell peas with solemnity and laughed for the first time since Texas. She took Mrs. Peterson's ledger in hand, a tall, thin book that held more story than numbers, and made tidy rows of dates and debts and credits, balancing a life that refused to balance. She made a stew nobody complained about and a custard that refused to set, and decided the custard could be called pudding, and sold dear to traveling salesmen who'd eat sawdust if you sugared it. She went to town for flour with Mrs. Peterson and learned how Redwood Springs looked when you walked it. She learned that the church steeple leaned like a drunk, that the blacksmith, Doc Miller's brother, had hands black as a coal sack and a voice smooth as a hymn, that children learned your name faster than adults did, that Silas Thorne's men watched from porches like crows on a fence, curious, then hungry, then bored. On the way back, a woman stopped her, a brown-haired, brown-eyed creature in a calico dress that she stood in like it was armor. You, the lady from the stage? I suppose I am, Eleanor said, uncertain which part was rumor and which part was beginning to be legend. My name's Ruth Garner, the woman said. My husband runs freight. I run the rest. If you need anything, salt, vinegar, gossip that won't rot your teeth, come by. Thank you, Eleanor said, and meant it. Every kindness west of the Mississippi felt amplified by distance, as if miles magnified mercy. Back in the kitchen, she found a small bouquet in a chipped cup on the windowsill, Indian paintbrush and desert marigold, arranged like a dare to despair. Mrs. Peterson lifted an eyebrow. Marshall, she said, men like him leave flowers the way other men leave footprints, without thinking about it. Eleanor touched a bloom. He's kind. He's good, Mrs. Peterson said. Kindness can be a trick. Goodness is a habit. By late afternoon, the sun had baked the world to a clean, bright cruelty. The windmill creaked like an old mare's hips. The town slowed, then stilled, the way creatures do when a predator prowls. Eleanor felt it before she saw the shadow. Silas Thorne stepped into the boarding house doorway, as if it were his parlor. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. Men who own too much forget which doors they paid for and which they didn't. "Afternoon, Mrs. Vance," he said, removing his hat and holding it to his chest in a gesture that couldn't decide whether it was polite or threatening. "I trust you're finding our little town hospitable." Mrs. Peterson wiped her hands and planted her feet. "Our little town," she said mildly, "pays taxes to the territory, not your ledger." Silas smiled at her like she was a candle he intended to snuff with 2 fingers. "I'm here on personal business," he said. His eyes slid to Eleanor. "Sundown's closer than it looks through a kitchen window." "I see it fine," Eleanor said, and didn't look away. "And I see a man used to hearing yes like it's the only word women know," he tiesked, enjoying himself. "The thing about choices, Mrs. Vance, is that some men collect them, others are left with what's left in the bin." He leaned, light as a cat, and lowered his voice. "A wedding solves a world of difficulties." "The world is smaller than you think," Eleanor said, "and I would rather share a room with naked rattlesnakes." Silas's eyes lit. "You talk pretty when you're cornered." "Kane," Mrs. Peterson said, calm as Sunday. She wasn't looking at Silas at all. She was looking past him, at the street. Kane Colton filled the doorway as quietly as shade finds a porch. He didn't put his hand on his gun. He put it on the doorframe, and somehow that felt more dangerous. "Silas," he said, and nodded, as if acknowledging a rattler who'd chosen not to bite yet. "You here to order supper?" "Just calling on a neighbor," Silas said, hat still to his chest, voice oiled. "Then you've called," Kane said. "Call somewhere else." Silas's smile went colder. "You're going to wear that badge thin, Marshal, rubbing it against causes that can't pay you back." Kane's eyes didn't change, but the room got a degree cooler. "The badge isn't for rent," he said, "and the law is ugly when it's hungry. Feed it something better." Silas tipped his hat, maybe to the marshal, maybe to the inevitable. "Sundown," he said to Eleanor, tasting the word like a promise. He stepped back into the heat, and the room exhaled. Kane watched him go, not like a hunter watches game, but like a man memorizing the route of a flood. He turned to Eleanor. "You all right?" "I am tired of men deciding what I am," she said. "That's not the same as being fine." He nodded as if she'd said something profound he'd been waiting his whole life to hear from someone. "You won't be alone when the light goes," he said, simple as adding water to beans. "Sundown in Redwood Springs is a trick of the light. The sky shows you glory while the ground keeps its secrets." Lamps bloomed along the street one by one. Men gathered in doorways, their silhouettes pinched by hats and bad habits. In the boarding house kitchen, Mrs. Peterson set down 3 bowls of stew and a shotgun, in that order. Josephine folded napkins with a seriousness that made Eleanor's throat ache with love. Kane returned as the first star showed. He'd changed coats and brought with him a quiet that wasn't silence. It was preparedness. He ate standing up, a few absent-minded bites, and moved to the window the way a clock's pendulum swings between alternatives. "Marshal," Mrs. Peterson said, "sit before you wear a trench in my floor." He's Saturday. He didn't stop watching. Eleanor found the strangest thing blooming in her chest, something like calm, but steadier. Not the calm of denial, or the numbness of exhaustion, the calm of knowing what you will do when a door opens, and a man like Silas steps through. She tightened Josephine's braid. She straightened the flowers in the chipped cup. She took the ledger from the shelf and set it on the table, as if to say, "Here are the numbers of my life. Let the night add or subtract as it dares." It did both. Silas didn't come himself. He sent 2 men with hats pulled low and hands that fidgeted near their belts like sparrows trapped under coats. They didn't make it to the top step. Kane opened the door on their raised knuckles. "Evening, boys," he said. "If you came to borrow sugar, Mrs. Peterson has plenty. If you came for something that isn't yours, I'm fresh out." "Mr. Thorne wants a word," the taller one said. "With the lady. She's got a name," Kane said. and she already used her words. "Take no back to your boss. Tell him I spelled it for you if you get lost." That. The shorter one glanced past Kane at the kitchen, saw Eleanor standing just behind his shoulder, and smiled a little to show his teeth. It was the last mistake he made that night. Kane didn't hit him. He didn't need to. Some men carry a room in their bones. The man stepped back and tripped over his certainty. "Tell Silas," Kane said, voice still conversational, "that if he wants a word with a woman in my town, he can save his breath for court." The men glanced at each other, then at the badge, then at the hand that wasn't on the gun but could be. They took the stairs down as if they'd been greased. Somewhere a piano in the saloon stumbled and caught rhythm again. Somewhere a coyote laughed at the idea of ownership. Kane shut the door and set his palm against it. He didn't sag. He registered the weight and decided to carry it. He turned. "You may have bought yourself a fight," he told Eleanor, as if she weren't already paying for so many. "I have been in a fight since I learned to sign another man's name," she said. "This one is honest." He looked at her then with an expression that might have been pride if he'd let it be. "You are one of the bravest women I have ever met," he said. "I am one of the most tired women you have ever met," she said back, and that, somehow, made him smile. Night settled like a shawl. The town breathed. The three of them, lawman, landlady, mother, sat at a kitchen table with a ledger and a shotgun and a vase of stubborn flowers, and held against a man who owned half of everything and meant to rent the rest. When the quiet was deep enough to trust, Josephine fell asleep in Eleanor's lap, her head a weight that felt like a vow. Kane dozed in a chair, boots braced, hat tipped low, body arranged so that waking would be a single motion. Mrs. Peterson snored, a practical snore that could have been mistaken for the purr of a satisfied cat. Eleanor did not sleep. She watched the slow swing of the clock's pendulum and counted heartbeats between the windmill's complaints. She traced the grain in the table and the path that had brought her here. New Orleans to Texas, to this stubborn kitchen at the edge of the world, where a man in a clean shirt put himself between her and a debt collector and called that the law. She thought of fire, how it cleanses and consumes and leaves room for wildflowers to grow in the black. She would not burn her house to please a man, but if it came to it, she would burn the old life, the shame, the silence, the practiced bows, and walk barefoot across the cooled ash, a woman who had finally said her own name out loud. Just before dawn, when the desert is neither night nor morning but a tight-held breath, there was a sound down the street, a rumble, not of hooves, but of intention. Kane was at the window before the second heartbeat. He peered, then eased back, mouth a hard line. "Boyd?" Mrs. Peterson guessed sleepily, and then frowned at herself for dragging the wrong villain out of the wardrobe of her mind. There were too many wolves in these hills. "Thorn," Kane said. "Gathering." He didn't say what men, courage, signatures. It didn't matter. The day would have its due. He looked at Eleanor and then at Josephine, who had never quite let go of his sleeve. "Whatever happens, you are not alone," he said. "Not in this town, not while I'm breathing." Eleanor nodded. The words slid into her like a key into a well-oiled lock. She bent and kissed her daughter's hair, tasting salt and dust and the strange sweetness of fear that has finally met its match. "Then let's make the coffee strong," she said, standing, "and the truth stronger." Outside, the windmill creaked, the sky paled, and on the eastern rim of the world, dust lifted like a coiled snake, Silas Thorne's kind of sunrise. Inside, three people made ready the only way people ever do, by choosing what they'll carry and what they'll set down. Eleanor smoothed the worn edge of the ledger one last time and opened it to a clean page. A new column, a new account, a new life, if she could keep it. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. The first honest light of morning sifted through the lacework of the boarding house curtains like flour through Mrs. Peterson's sieve, dusting Eleanor Vance's cheek and waking her without the jolt of fear that had been her alarm for months. It was such a small mercy to open her eyes and not feel the world leaning over her with a ledger and a knife, but it felt as extravagant as velvet. Josephine slept with her mouth slightly open, lashes damp from the residue of weeping, one small palm splayed over the faded hem of her mother's sleeve. Eleanor lay a long moment listening. The tick of a downstairs clock, the mild pagan hymn of sparrows at the eaves, the soft scuff of a broom on the front steps. Redwood Springs sounded ordinary. The sound of an ordinary town had never meant so much. She rose, smoothing her dress with hands that trembled less than yesterday, and tied her hair with the plain ribbon that said, "Today I belong to work." On the way downstairs, she paused on the landing. A framed sampler stitched with a proverb, "Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly." There was a thread pulled loose near mercy. Perhaps, she thought, mercy always came with loose threads. Mrs. Peterson's kitchen was fragrant with coffee and frying potatoes. "Good morning, dearie," the older woman said without turning, as if she could smell company as easily as breakfast. "Sleep?" "Like a log," Eleanor admitted, which was almost true. "Please, let me help." "Please do," said Mrs. Peterson, passing her a bowl of brown eggs as though passing a torch. "Marshal Colton says you know your way around a stove. I've always believed a kitchen will train a heart to keep steady." And Eleanor cracked eggs, whisked them with salt, and a memory of New Orleans cream that was not available here, and let the new rhythm carry her chop, stir, taste, breathe. She found that labor, if honest, could be prayer. By noon, she'd scrubbed the pantry shelf and earned 3 separate compliments from men with hats in their hands. In the afternoon, she washed bedding in a tub behind the house. Sleeves rolled past her elbows. When she wrung a sheet, the muscles in her forearms sang. Tiredness, real and earned, felt better than the old exhaustion of dread. Kane Colton came near sunset, the sky a pale blaze behind him, a shadow on a tall horse. He dismounted with the unconscious grace of a man who had always trusted the ground to meet him, and yet limped just enough to make Eleanor's breath catch. His eyes were a marshal's eyes, keen, blue, patient, but his first words were gentle. "Afternoon, Mrs. Vance." "Afternoon, Marshal." She tried the title in her mouth again, this time as thanks. "Mrs. Peterson says you saved me from a mutiny. Some of the ranch hands wanted to arrest her coffee." "Her coffee is strong," Eleanor said deadpan, "and verging on unlawful. I softened it with a spoon of molasses. I hope the statute allows for that." He laughed, short and surprised, like a man tripping into delight. "I reckon we can file it under public safety." "Oh?" They ate on the back stoop, simple fare. 2 cups of coffee that were no longer seditious, and thick slices of bread spread with blackberry preserves. Josephine sat between them with a tin soldier Kane had produced from somewhere, solemnly marching him along the step and occasionally making him salute the cat. The cat did not salute back. Kane's talk came slow weather, cattle prices, a fence the Parsons boys were mending out by Cottonwood Creek. Eleanor listened. The cadence of local names and distances soothed something torn in her mind. To belong anywhere, you must first learn its map. To heal, sometimes you must first repeat the names of the places that will not hurt you. In the quiet that followed, she glanced at his scarred knuckles where his mug rested. "You were away," she said softly, "before this place." "I was." He didn't offer the war's name. Men who had known it didn't have to. "And you came back to hold the line for a town." "I came back to keep promises." His gaze flickered toward Josephine and then toward Eleanor's folded hands. "Sometimes we make them for others. Sometimes we make them for ourselves." When he left a sense of scaffolding behind. Invisible planks under a bridge she did not yet dare to cross. That night Eleanor slept again, and did not dream of ledgers. By the 3rd day, a routine settled over the boarding house like a shawl that had finally remembered your shoulders. Eleanor was up before light to stoke the stove. She learned the town by the traffic of footsteps on the porch. Mrs. Bell with her pinched mouth and generous tips, the Parsons twins who ate as if they had made a blood pact with hunger, Reverend Amos with his awkward kindness and a pocket full of peppermints for children he was trying to win to God with sugar. Between breakfast and dinner, Eleanor swept, laundered, mended. She learned the choir of Redwood Springs, the squeak of the bank's sign in a crosswind, the jail door's unpleasantly cheerful click, the clatter of the saloon piano that played hymns at noon as if to apologize for its evening sins. She kept to the back threshold when Silas Thorne's men sauntered up. Maine men who walked like the street belonged to their boots. Mrs. Peterson muttered when they passed. "Buzzards," she said. "They can smell weakness from 30 miles. I would like to smell peppermint instead." Josephine declared from a flour-dusted stool and produced a stolen candy. Mrs. Peterson scowled with theatrical severity and then hid a smile in the dish towel. In the afternoons, when the heat had a moral lesson to teach and the wind forgot its manners, Eleanor took Josephine up the hill beyond the livery to a stand of cottonwoods that kept their own counsel. There she taught her daughter the names of leaves and how to sit still long enough for a bluebird to decide you were furniture. "What do you pray for, Mama?" Josephine asked once, head in Eleanor's lap. "Bread that rises," Eleanor said lightly, and then, when Josephine's brow furrowed at the unsatisfactory adult joke, she added, "Courage that doesn't boast, and rest that doesn't shame us." "Also a kitten," Josephine said firmly, and Eleanor kissed her hair. "Also a kitten." End quote. Not every hour was quiet. The first time Eleanor carried a tray through the parlor and found Silas Thorne himself in the chair by the front window, his legs crossed like a length of rope that wanted to trip someone. She felt the room tilt. He was clean-shaven today, suited like a courtroom, and smiling as if kindness were a coin he bit to test its metal. "Mrs. Vance," he drawled, as if they were on a first-name basis with fate, "I'm gratified to see you found enterprise in our fair town." I'm gratified to be paid for it," she replied, steadying the tray. Silas tilted his head. "There are easier arrangements than work. My offer stands until sunset." "The sun has set," she said, and risen, and set the coffee down before him with a carefulness that suggested she could also spill it. Kane came in then, hat in hand, dust on his shoulders. He didn't look at Thorne, not at first. He looked at Eleanor, and in that look she saw a question. "Are you all right?" She answered with the smallest of nods. He turned his body, then the angle of a man who could be polite and still block a doorway. "Thorne," he said. "Marshal, you here to eat or to make a mess?" "Why, I am a patron of respectable establishments," Silas said lightly. "I wouldn't dream of making a mess I couldn't buy." Kane's smile did not reach his eyes. "I once knew a man who tried to buy thunder, got struck by it." Silas's teeth showed. "You and your weather." He stood, adjusted his cuffs, and left 3 coins on the arm of the chair, too much money for coffee, as if to stain the room with his generosity. When he had gone, the air felt less used. "Sorry," Kane said absurdly, as if he could apologize for all the men who had ever behaved like Silas. "I'll keep him out of here when I can." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "But some storms a woman must learn to walk through." He nodded once, a soldier acknowledging another's training. Late in the week, Eleanor discovered a stack of letters in a shallow drawer by the parlor window paper, thinned at the folds, edges softened by thumb and time. She turned one envelope over and recognized the hand, the elegant schooling of a woman who had been made to practice. She should have put them back. She read them instead, in the clean square of afternoon sun, as if the light itself had asked to be used for this. Emily Colton's words were steady and wry, the ink sometimes blotched from a carriage ride or a teacup bump. She wrote of small things with an attention that made them large. How the scent of rain on dust felt like the past, remembering it had once been a river. How her husband's limp did not make him less, only more careful with his steps. How courage, properly understood, wasn't a uniform, but a habit of returning. A letter dated 1 week before the fever took her was soft as linen from rereading. "My dearest Kane, you do not have to be made of iron to hold up a house. Wood holds too, and wood is kinder on the bones. Let the wind through you, let yourself bend. Bend toward joy." Eleanor's throat tightened. All her life, love had been either currency or confession. Here it looked like instruction, a way to stand. She felt suddenly like a trespasser and a pupil at once. That evening, on the porch, the letters like petals pressed flat between them. She found the courage to say it. "I read them. I'm sorry. I should have asked." Kane took up the topmost page and smoothed its curl with 2 fingers. If Emily minded being read, he said, she would have written shorter sentences. He gave Eleanor a rueful look. She was a woman who liked being understood even by strangers not yet met. "She asked you to bend toward joy," Eleanor said, the words careful as china. "She did," he said, and his smile now was not a soldier's but a husband's, remembered, but no less true. "I'm still learning how." They sat with the dusk for a while, the cottonwood leaves working like green tongues in a summer mouth. In the street beyond, a boy tossed a hoop and chased it. The hoop made the hollow singing of a cheap miracle. Josephine fell asleep against Eleanor's side, a sigh that tasted like milk and dust. A person could build a life from such small sweetnesses, Eleanor thought. Or at least a bridge. The next morning, a telegram arrived like a fly in the milk. Mrs. Peterson knocked on the kitchen door with a face that did not want to be the bearer of news. Eleanor took the paper with hands that somehow already knew how it would hurt. New Orleans Trust and Merchants. Account Vance in arrears. Note in default. Creditor S. Thorne asserts. Claim to Redwood Springs Holdings. Stop. Action. In 48 hours, absent satisfaction. Stop. The words were so curt they squeaked. Eleanor imagined a teletype punching through her options one hole at a time. Pay what you do not have. Marry what you cannot love. Run where you cannot go. She passed the flimsy page to Kane without speaking. He read, nostrils flaring once. When he looked up, the old soldier was everyone again, the man with the badge, the father, the widower who had already buried one kind of future and would not easily bury another. "He can't take what isn't his to take," he said evenly. "He has a judge," Eleanor said. "He bought one with whiskey and a debt book." Kane nodded, jaw working. "Then we go see the judge sober." And they walked to the courthouse together, a small building pretending to be a temple, all white trim and pews that squeaked confessions out of trousers. Judge Morley had a priest's hair and a banker's eyes. His desk was tidy in the way of men who ruin people with paperwork. "Marshal Colton," he said. "Mrs. Vance, I suppose we're here to speak of claims." "We're here to speak of the law," Kane said. He set his hat down with a firmness that made a noise like period at the end of a sentence. "A widow cannot be compelled to marry to satisfy a debt. Property deeded to her as a homestead is protected." The judge smiled without teeth. "In an ideal world, Marshal, perhaps. But Mr. Thorne holds notes and liens filed in Orleans Parish, and the matter is more elastic than your sentiments." "Elastic," Kane repeated. "Is that what you call strangling?" "Come now," the judge said. "No one is strangling anyone. Mr. Thorne is merely taking what is his due." What is due," Kane said, voice very calm, "is decency." Eleanor watched the exchange with a strange split feeling, terror on one side, and on the other a cool, observational clarity that had kept her alive this long. Men like Morley did not fear justice. They feared embarrassment. "Your Honor," she said, because titles mattered to men who wore them like armor, "do you imagine the wives of Redwood Springs cannot read? That we do not talk? If Mr. Thorne takes a mother from her home by such means, every pew in your church will whisper your name." Morley's pen paused above its tidy paper. He looked at Kane, at Eleanor, at Kane again, as if the answer to his future might be hidden in the marshal's face. Then he set the pen down too carefully. 48 hours, he said. If there is no satisfaction by then, the court will entertain Mr. Thorne's petition to auction the land. Outside, the sun felt too bright. Kane looked like a man who had swallowed a horseshoe. "I'll ride to the county seat," he said. "There's a circuit judge who won't dance for Thorne's fiddler. I can be back by tomorrow night." "You'll ride alone?" Eleanor asked, because the question could hold what she could not otherwise say. "Be careful. Do not leave me in this world without your stubbornness." "I'll take Deputy Finch," he said, "and a copy of Emily's letter where she advises me not to be a fool." The corner of his mouth tipped. She had a way of being persuasive even after her leaving. "Then go," Eleanor said, and surprised herself with how steady it sounded. "I'll keep to work. and to the boarding house, and to the kitten we do not yet have. Buy the cat, he said. Send me the bill. He left with Finch within the hour. The day went gauzy with heat. Eleanor scrubbed the back steps as if cleanliness could be a rampart. Mrs. Peterson baked 2 pies and called it appeasing the gods. Josephine practiced solemnly greeting an imaginary kitten with a curtsy. "What will you name it?" Eleanor asked. "Thunder," Josephine said, "so it obeys us." Silas Thorne did not wait 48 hours. He arrived the next afternoon with 4 men and a paper he flourished like a flag. "Where is she?" he demanded at the boarding-house gate. "Where is my debtor?" "Not here," Mrs. Peterson snapped, stepping into the doorway with a shotgun that trembled only a little. "And even if she were, this is my porch." Silas glanced at the gun and then passed it. "Mrs. Vance," he called, sing-song as a child tormenting a cat through a fence. "Don't make this ugly." Eleanor stood at the foot of the back stairs with an armful of sheets and a spine that had just learned a new grammar. She wanted to run. She did not. "Josephine," she said without looking down, "go to the pantry, close the door, count to 100, then count again." "Oh." "Yes, Mama," said the very small voice. Eleanor stepped into the hall. The heat of the day seemed to fold itself indoors. Silas saw her and smiled as if they were old friends meeting on a riverboat promenade. "Mrs. Vance," he said. "Let's be sensible." "Let's," she agreed. "Sensible people do not threaten boarding-house owners with torches." Silas's eyes glittered. "Sensible people do not insult a man's patience." He reached for her arm. She stepped back, and his hand closed on air. He made a sking sound. "Come now, don't embarrass yourself." What happened next belonged to the old world, the one before ledger and loss, the part of Eleanor that had not yet learned to be afraid of her own strength. She dropped the sheets. She reached under the hall table and took the small pistol she had hidden there that morning, because fear had a habit of looking like prudence in a woman's hands. She lifted it and aimed it straight at Silas Thorne's pride. "Stop," she said, her voice the edge of a cool blade. Silas laughed, incredulous. "You won't shoot me." "I will not miss," she said, and knew it to be true as she had rarely known anything. All the practice of survival had steadied her wrists. A man to Silas's left raised his rifle, and in the same breath the world cracked. A single shot from the shadows of the stable door, precise as punctuation. The man's hat jerked, flew a warning shaved out of the afternoon. Deputy Finch stepped into view with his weapon already leveled for a second sentence. "Mr. Thorne," Finch said mildly, as if asking a dog to sit, "the marshal left me in charge of the town. You know how fussy I get about paperwork. I suggest you come to the jail quietly and accuse us of injustice later, in writing." Silas's face went slack and then tight again. "You think you can hold me on a threat?" "I can hold you for disrupting the peace," Finch replied, "and for scaring cats and children. We're particular about those here." 2 of Cain's men materialized like the consequence of prayer. In the half-second where pride fought practicality, Eleanor saw Silas weigh exactly how much blood he was willing to spend to win this hallway. He lifted his empty hands, smile returning with a tear in it. "Why, gentlemen," he said, "I came for coffee." "You'll get it," Finch said. "We keep a pot on at the jail for guests." They walked Silas out without shooting anyone, and only after the door shut on the street did Eleanor's hands begin to shake. When she turned, Mrs. Peterson was there with a tumbler of water and the astonished admiration of one woman watching another step across a line she had sworn never to cross again. "You aimed straight," the older woman said. "I told him I would not miss," Eleanor answered, and had to sit down because sitting allowed the world to be held by furniture instead of by her spine alone. In the pantry, Josephine reached 200 and knocked to be let out. When she came blinking into the hall and saw her mother, she ran with a small animal sound and burrowed like a creature who had once lived in her mother's ribs. "It is all right," Eleanor murmured into her daughter's hair, which smelled like bread and sundae. "We are all right. We are not alone." Cain returned near midnight, saddle-worn and storm-eyed, carrying one more sunrise in his pocket. The circuit judge's injunction ink still damp scolded Judge Morley for overreach, in a tone so legal it might as well have been Holy Writ. Cain stood in Mrs. Peterson's parlor with dust in his eyelashes and read the words aloud as if they were scripture that could bless a house. Effective immediately, he concluded, no transfer or auction of the homestead may proceed pending a full hearing in the county seat. Terms: equitable, protection, under statute. He looked up then and found Eleanor standing in socks and a borrowed shawl, her hair sleek, tumbled, and her eyes very awake. "You did it," she said. "We did not lose," he corrected softly. "Sometimes that is the same thing." His gaze searched her face. "Finch told me what happened. Are you all right?" Eleanor surprised them both by laughing, quietly and a little wildly, the laugh of someone who has seen the knife and also the hand that removes it. "I told Josephine we would buy a cat. After today, it seems the only decent thing to do." Kane's mouth tilted. "We can put it in the budget between ammunition and fence wire." He took a breath. "Eleanor," he stopped, as if the name itself were a threshold he was not sure he had permission to cross. "Yes? I mean to say," he began, and then shook his head, soldierly embarrassment catching him by the collar. "No, I'll say it plain. You are the bravest person I have ever seen." "I was terrified," she confessed, which felt like borrowing courage from a future in which one could tell the truth and not be punished. "Being brave is no proof against being afraid." "It's the only proof," he said. The room went very quiet. The clock ticked like a patient horse. He looked to the window, to the thin slice of moon shrugging its shoulder along the sill. When he spoke again, it was with a simple sincerity that undid her more than poetry could have. "I want you to be safe. I want you to have a place that is not defined by what a man wants to take from you." "I would like that too," she said, "very much." He nodded once, an oath set down for later signing. "Tomorrow, I'll post a deputy at the boarding house and another at whatever homestead you choose to sleep in. Thorne will rattle bars, but he won't break them. And the judge will be busy trying to explain to the circuit why his pockets jingle." Kane gave her a tired grin. "It turns out even men who sell their honor do not like the receipt being waved in church." Eleanor smiled back, felt the fatigue pull at her bones like a gentle tide. "You should rest," she said. "So should you." "Oh, I will, after I buy a cat." He tipped his hat as if it were still on his head and went out into the thin, silvered street. The night had that rare, forgiving cool that makes even hard towns breathe easier. Eleanor stood at the window long after he had gone, the injunction on the table like a temporary truce signed by angels. Dawn shook a pink shawl over Redwood Springs. The sky looked as if it had finally remembered how to be tender. Eleanor woke to Josephine's whisper at her ear. "Mama, may we go choose Thunder?" They found the cat behind the livery, a soot-colored scrap with a white star on her chest and a disposition that suggested she had been writing her own laws for some time. "Thunder," Josephine declared, and the cat blinked, which is as close as cats ever come to consent. Eleanor carried Thunder back to the boarding house in a flour sack with the top folded down, unaccountably pleased by the soft indignation protesting from within. On the porch, Mrs. Peterson harumphed and put down a saucer of cream as if she had not done the very same thing for a half-dozen other strays in her life. "I suppose," she said, "we are civilizing another creature today." "Today," Eleanor replied, "I will accept civilization in any form." Loose. Kane arrived later with fresh paper notice posted at 3 corners of town regarding the injunction and a bag of nails. "For the boarding house steps," he said. "Loose board. Nearly sent me to the doctor." She watched him kneel and set the nails, quick and neat, a tradesman again instead of a man who kept the peace with a gun. He finished and sat back on his heels, and when he looked up, the look was unguarded, affection without possession, admiration without demand. It was the kind of gaze a weary heart might learn to step into without fear. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than woodwork. He stood and dusted his hands. "There's talk already, of course." "Let them talk," she answered, and found she meant it. "Let them spend their breath on us. We'll be busy spending our lives." He smiled, that small, private smile that was both new and known. "I'll come by this evening. If Mrs. Peterson will sell me a slice of whatever pie she's pretending is for paying guests only." "Blueberry," Mrs. Peterson shouted from the kitchen, because the entire world was a thin house where everyone heard everything. And it will cost you double. I'm paid in cats, Kane said, straight-faced. Then you're overdrawn, Mrs. Peterson replied. But I'll take Thunder as collateral. Thunder, entirely uninterested in human finance, leapt into Josephine's lap and closed her eyes in a purr that sounded like a tiny machine making peace. That night, after supper and pie and one stolen smile too many to be a coincidence, after Kane checked the latches twice and Finch walked the block with a lantern that wrote gold letters on the dirt, Eleanor tucked Josephine into bed and sat alone a while with the letters she had returned to their drawer. She did not read them. She only laid her palm flat on the page at the top and felt the ordinary miracle of paper, how it keeps what it can, how it lets go of what it must. She thought of her father's last letter, the one where he had failed her so efficiently with a signature. She thought of her late husband's ledger, the lies stacked neatly like coins that didn't ring true when dropped. She thought of Kane's injunction, the words that had arrived like a door opening, effective immediately, as if justice were sometimes a matter of timing as much as truth. And she thought, not without fear but with a furious tenderness, of the life knitting itself together around her like a sweater you only realize fits after you stop tugging at it. She would defend it. She would mend it. She would learn the names of the stars above this town and teach them to Josephine. And if Silas Thorne brought darkness, then she would light the stove and the lamp and the quiet copper of her own voice, and she would not miss. Outside, a coyote yipped and was answered. Somewhere in the alley, two boys argued about marbles as if civilization were a matter of who owned the agate. Far off, a train's whistle threaded the horizon. The world was still large and wild and full of men with ledgers, but the house was warm, and Thunder's purr stitched a small rolling seam through the night. Eleanor closed her eyes and did at last the courageous, unboastful thing she had prayed for on the hill. She rested without shame. When sleep came, it brought a dream of walking not alone, not chased, only walking on a road that had more sky than fear toward a small homestead with a front step that did not creak, and a man on the porch who stood when he saw her, sorrows and all, and tipped his hat as if the gesture were a way of saying, "Welcome home. Still here." Hit the comments with a flood of 1 second, and tell us where you're watching from if you love Wild West love stories. The fragile peace that had settled over Eleanor's life was shattered a week later with the arrival of a telegram. Mrs. Peterson had found it first thin yellow paper, sharp black letters, the sort of message that never brings anything you would wish on a friend. She stood in the kitchen doorway twisting her apron, eyes darting from the envelope to Eleanor, as if hoping the thing might dissolve if she just blinked hard enough. "It's from New Orleans," she said, and her voice betrayed the tremor she tried to hide. Eleanor took it with hands she forced to remain steady. Josephine, at the table with a tin cup of milk, watched her mother with solemn eyes. Eleanor broke the seal. The words were precise and bloodless. The bank, the outstanding debt, the court order. A seizure within 48 hours, unless full settlement was remitted. And an addendum cold as a gravestone, stating that all matters pertaining to the Redwood Springs homestead had been delegated to its new lien holder, one Mr. S. Thorne, whose authority in the county had, the letter suggested, customary latitude. The paper blurred. Eleanor set it down on the table and pressed the heel of her hand to her breastbone, where panic rose like a trapped bird. She swallowed it back, not in front of Josephine. "Finish your milk, darling," she said softly. "Then sit with your primer for a bit." The girl obeyed, eyes never leaving her mother's face. Kane came 20 minutes later, boots quick in the hall, hat already in his hand. He had a way of entering rooms like a wind, clearing out the air you'd been choking on. He read the telegram once, then again, and his mouth thinned until the scar at his lip, the one Eleanor had only half noticed before, went white. "He can't," he said. "Not by the law." "Silas Thorne's law isn't written on paper," Eleanor replied, fighting to keep her voice even. "It's written in fear and in debts. Everyone owes him something, even if they only owe him silence." Kane's jaw worked. "I'll ride to the judge. I'll ride to the county seat today. I'll raise this with Sheriff Alden if I have to. He hates Thorne's shadow racket, and he owes me a favor from 72. His hands folded the telegram precisely and slid it back across the table to her. We aren't going to be bullied out of what's yours. Eleanor touched the edge of the paper. I won't see you ruined over me. You won't, he said, and for a moment she believed him because he said it as if the desert itself would move if he told it to. Pack Josephine a small bag, he added more gently. Not to run, to be ready if we have to move you across the street to the jail overnight. It's ugly lodging, but there's iron and a good lock. Thorne's men don't test a door they know I'm sleeping behind. It was a good plan in a bad world. The afternoon stretched taut as wire, Kane in and out with folded papers, a rider sent toward the county seat, Mrs. Peterson turning dough with a ferocity that made the kitchen smell like a battlefield of yeast and smoke. Twilight came, and with it the thin pink bleed along the western ridge. Josephine fell asleep sitting up, cheek against Eleanor's hip, the primer slipping from her fingers. The knock came after dark, 3 dull blows that rattled the boarding-house glass. Mrs. Peterson's hands froze around a ladle. Kane stood, and his chair legs barked against the floorboards. He didn't go to the door. He went to the lamp and turned the wick down, letting the room fall into an amber dimness. Back room, he said softly to Eleanor. Take Josephine. Oh. The knock came again, and then the voice, flayed with whiskey and triumph. Evenin', Mrs. Peterson. Open up now. We've business. Thorne. Mrs. Peterson stepped to the door with a shotgun she kept behind the kitchen woodbox for snakes and drunks and men with bad ideas. You've no business at my threshold, Silas Thorne, she said with a steadiness Eleanor loved her for. Marshal's orders. House is under his protection. Oh, my orders, Thorne said pleasantly from the stoop, are stamped and filed and blessed by His Honor the Judge. You can ask him yourself when he returns to town unless he's taking a long bath in whiskey, which is his preferred form of jurisprudence. Kane moved to the hall, unfolded himself like a storm cloud, and opened the door so suddenly that Thorne's next sentence stumbled out and died. The 2 men stood in the frame like pillars that would not share a roof. Kane tall, hat low over his eyes, the long black of his duster making him seem cut from the dark. Thorne in a scoured suit with a neat silk tie and a face that had been carefully shaved in triumph. You'll not set foot in this house, Kane said. He held the door with one hand. His other hand rested, almost lazily, near the butt of the Colt on his hip. This is a lawful boarding house and a private domicile. Oh, lawful? Thorne laughed. Nothing in this town stays lawful unless I let it. Be reasonable, Marshal. I can have my men take the house and the woman inside it, and we'll call it paperwork. Or you can step aside and let me ask the lady if she'd like to settle matters in the civilized way. I first proposed wedding ring, warm bed, debt forgiven. He clicked his tongue. I'm a generous man. Kane's face didn't change. You're a carrion bird with polished shoes. Loaf. The night had drawn neighbors like gnats. Eleanor could hear the hush of their bodies gathering beyond the porch boots on dust, a child hushed by a mother, someone swallowing a string of risky words. In the back room Josephine slept on, her breath feathering against Eleanor's sleeve. Eleanor stood with her left hand on the girl and her right hand on the little pistol she'd hidden in a folded shawl. She listened to the thread of Kane's voice as one listens to a rope that must hold. Mrs. Vance, Thorne called brightly, raising his voice. Are you listening? You know the arithmetic. A bed and a name or your trunk on the street, and your child hungry by Sunday. We've finished the polite portion of this dance. Eleanor stepped from the back room before fear could stitch her to the floor. She moved into the hall where the dim lamp caught her face. Kane tilted his head a fraction, as if to say, I can hold this alone. She shook hers once, as if to say, You won't have to. I heard you, she said to Thorne, and I have an answer. Her voice felt like a blade that had been sharpened on tears. No. Something ugly rippled across Thorne's mouth. He leaned forward until the porch lantern cast a deep well under his brow. Then I take what is mine by paper and power. By theft and threat, Eleanor said. Not by right. Same coin in Redwood Springs, sweetheart, Thorne said, and flicked 2 fingers. Men eased from the dark like bad thoughts, 5, 6, maybe more. The kind of men who leaned on the weak rather than their own legs. They split 2 toward the back alley that ran along Mrs. Peterson's fence, 2 onto the porch, 1 down the side toward the stable. Kane stepped into the doorway and became the door. His voice dropped until it was made of gravel. You maneuver your men even 1 step farther, Silas, and your next official document will be a coroner's note. This Thorne smiled, thin as a blade. You won't start a gunfight with your girl watching, Colton. Kane didn't look back at Eleanor. Ma'am, he said, bar the kitchen door. Then take Josephine and go through the pantry to the alley, back to the livery. Jasper owes me. He'll open the grain room. 10 minutes 15 and I'll meet you there. I won't run, Eleanor said, and felt the truth of it settle. Not from you, and not from him. Kane's shoulders shifted, not quite a sigh, not quite a plea. Then he nodded once. All right, we stand. What happened after moved fast and also slowly, as if time itself were unsure which duty to honor. A bottle shattered against the porch rail. A match flared. Someone in the watching crowd hissed, "Fire!" But the match died in a boot heel because Mrs. Peterson, God bless her, had stepped out with that shotgun squared to her shoulder and the look of a woman who had buried 2 husbands and would not mind 1 more if the arithmetic turned that way. Enough, someone barked from the street. Doc Miller, sober for once, coat half-buttoned, eyes squeezed into slits. Put that damn lamp out, or you'll scorch half the town. Thorne lifted his hands in an elegant shrug, the kind that always sold to weak men. You see, I try an evening stroll and the town panics. Marshal, we will conclude this at the courthouse tomorrow. For tonight, consider this an inspection. He leaned his weight on the word. 2 of his men slid their boots over the porch boards in a way that let Eleanor hear the nail heads drag. Let us in. No, Kane didn't bark it. He simply said it in a voice low and final. His Colt cleared leather and pointed between Thorne's eyes. The night turned into a held breath. Even the wind paused like a hand on a doorknob. Somewhere, far down the street, a baby cried. Do you think, Thorne murmured, you can shoot me in front of half of Redwood Springs and keep your star? I think, Kane said, if I have to shoot you to keep a woman from being hauled into hell by her hair, there isn't a star worth having that I would want. His gun never wavered. You go now. In the morning, bring all the paper you like. We'll be waiting with witnesses, with ledgers, with the truth. Truth, Thorne said, savoring the vowel. Who vouches for yours? A fallen widow with a bastard, a landlady who waters whiskey, and a marshal who slept his grief under a bar for 2 winters. Be careful where you stand, Colton. The ground under you's softer than you think. Kane's eyes flicked once not to Thorne but to the man at the end of the porch, the one easing his hand toward the iron on his hip. The moment turned on that small glance. The man drew. Kane's first shot took the porch post just above the man's wrist. Splinters spat. The man yelped, and his gun clattered. The second shot, someone else's, sang from the dark and buried itself in the doorframe near Eleanor's shoulder. Josephine woke in the back room and cried out, "Mama!" in a voice that cut through Eleanor like glass. She moved without thinking. She set her body between the hall and the open door. She pulled the small pistol from the shawl, and hands steady now aimed low, as her father once taught her when she was 12 and practicing with a pellet gun in a walled garden of a house that no longer existed. A muzzle flash lit the porch. Eleanor squeezed. The bullet chewed the plank at a man's boot and shaved leather. He danced back with a curse. Enough, Thorne roared, but the night had already tipped. 2 more of his men fired wild, foolish warning shots meant to make fearful people cower. What they did instead was ignite the flint in the townsfolk's chests. A window banged open across the street, and old Mrs. Cafferty, who had nursed half of them into this world and laid out the other half when they left it, shouted, "You'll not shoot up the Peterson house while I keep breath." Her sons appeared behind her with long duck guns that had hung above the mantel since the war. Down the alley, Jasper from the livery planted himself at his gate with a pitchfork like Neptune rising from the sea. Even the station agent crept from behind his counter with a lantern and a length of pipe gripped white knuckle in his hand. Thorne's smile curdled. This town he owned with paper was remembering a number greater than debt itself. "Colton," he said, and the silken patience was gone now. "You will regret this arithmetic." "You first," Kane said. The standoff held until the judge's clerk, thin, terrified, in his nightshirt and boots, came panting down the lane with a paper in his hand that shook so badly the seal jangled like a coin. "There's an injunction," he gasped, "filed by the marshal at dusk and countersigned by His Honor, in a moment of prudence. Stays all actions on the Vance matter until testimony can be heard at 10 of the clock tomorrow." Kane didn't blink. "Read it," he said. The boy read, voice cracking, but the words out loud were like water in a dry trough. The townsfolk breathed. Mrs. Peterson lowered her shotgun half an inch. Thorne listened, nostrils flared like a horse that has run too far on a bad bet. He stepped back off the threshold, one slow step at a time, while his eyes never left Kane's, the way men do when they promise themselves a debt they will later collect with interest. "We'll be back at 10, he said, "with counsel. Come bathed, Mrs." Peterson snapped. "So you don't track filth into the court." A small laugh ran the length of the street like a tiny rainstorm. Thorne's cheek tightened. He turned. His men turned with him and bled back into the darkness in a mutter of spurs. The night exhaled. Kane shut the door and locked it. He stood for a long moment with his palm flat against the wood, head bowed, the stance of a man saying grace over a meal he does not deserve. Then he holstered the Colt and turned. Eleanor was standing in the half-light, with the little pistol at her side. She had not realized she was shaking until he reached for her wrist, and the pistol rattled lightly against her knuckles. He took it from her gently and set it on the side table. "You did well," he said. "I missed," she replied. "You missed on purpose," he said. That boot will remind him to step carefully. Something broke in Eleanor then, not courage, but the binding cloth around it. The tears came, hot and humiliating and unstoppable. She heard herself make a small sound in her throat, and then Kane's arms were around her, one big hand between her shoulder blades, steadying, anchoring. She let the arrears of months pour out against his vest, and when it was done she stepped back quickly, ashamed. "Forgive me," she whispered. I know," he said. "I know." From the back room, Josephine's cry rose again, not panicked now, just lost in the dark. Eleanor wiped her face with one hand and went to her. She gathered the child in, crooning nonsense, the old New Orleans lullaby that had belonged to a maid whose real name she'd never been permitted to learn. Josephine's small body folded, trusting, into her mother's arm. They did not sleep much, any of them. The town didn't either. It is hard to close your eyes when the arithmetic of power has been tallied in your street and you have discovered that the sum is not what you feared. Men sat on stoops with rifles across their knees. Women brewed coffee in dented kettles and sent cups along like sacrament. Somewhere in the middle hours, the sky lightened with a line of pearl. At dawn, Kane went to wash at the pump. The water ran over his knuckles and came away pink, and he realized for the first time that a splinter from the porch post had tunneled into the meat of his hand. He dug it out with his pocket knife and didn't flinch. "Mrs." Peterson brought him coffee in a mug so thick it could have stopped a bullet, and for a moment they stood in the cool yard like two old friends after a storm. "You look 10 years younger," she said, squinting at him. "That injunction took 5 off me," he said. "The rest is relief she didn't get dragged out under my watch." Mrs. Peterson sniffed. "You did right, and she did right. There's a kind of bravery a man sees in battle. Then there's the kind a woman keeps for kitchens and cradles and hallways where bad men stand. Don't confuse the two. Tonight we saw both." He nodded, and the words worked a warmth through him he would not have named. By 8, the boarding-house parlor had been cleaned of plaster dust and pride. Eleanor put Josephine into a blue dress, whose hem she had mended by lamplight, braided her hair with fingers that stopped shaking only when the braid lay smooth against the child's back, and then chose the plainest dress she owned for herself, as if simplicity might add weight to truth. Kane, fresh shirt, hair combed back with water, stood at the threshold with his hat in his hands, like a man about to enter church. They did not speak of fear. They spoke of what to bring, the telegram, the bank letters, the copy of the deed she had kept tucked behind a portrait in her trunk, the ledger Mrs. Peterson had quietly kept of the boarding house rent Thorne had forgiven 3 separate times, when it suited him to appear generous in public while doubling his charges to the girls at Maggie's to make up the difference. "May I come?" Sarah asked from the kitchen door, sudden as a bird. Kane's daughter, wild hair, sun-browned cheeks, had appeared at dawn with a basket of eggs, as if she were only doing her chores and not trying to wedge herself between the world and whatever harm the world had planned. "I can sit with Josephine in the back of the room and keep her quiet." "Oh, you may," Kane said softly, and something like gratitude moved behind his ribs, because there are some bridges between a man's old life and his new one that are best crossed by children who do not ask for maps. They walked. The town walked with them, not a parade, not exactly, but a slow river of bodies that flowed toward the courthouse steps. The building had never seemed much to Eleanor, a rectangle of brick with a bell that rang on Sundays and on hangings. Today it looked different because the faces in front of it looked different. People who had never stood shoulder to shoulder with their neighbors stood so now, as if realizing they had more in common than the debts they owed one man. Judge Havemeyer looked as if he had slept in his wig. He sat high and sour, his clerk to his right with ink already on his cuffs. Sheriff Alden, summoned from the next county by a telegram that Kane's friend at the telegraph office had sent on his own coin, settled into a back row bench with his hat down over his eyes in a way that suggested he saw plenty of everything. Thorne arrived last, of course lawyers in tow, slick boots, smile carefully whitewashed. His eyes skimmed the room and landed for a fraction of a second on the line of townsfolk who had taken seats behind Eleanor, Mrs. Cafferty and her sons, Jasper of the pitchfork, Doc Miller clutching a notebook as if it were a shield, and, unexpectedly, the bank's former bookkeeper, a tidy little man named Harold Finch, who had left town 2 months prior and now returned with a face like a man determined to vomit up a secret that had soured his stomach. Proceedings began in the usual, sleepy manner that had always so benefited men like Thorne. But it did not stay sleepy. Kane stood not as a lover defending a woman, but as a marshal defending the idea that paper without justice is only kindling. He spoke of the lien transferred under duress from a dead man's estate, of interest compounded beyond any reasonable schedule, of forgiveness offered to certain businesses in exchange for the use of their back rooms on election days, of a judge's signatures appearing on documents at hours when the judge was known to be asleep at the saloon. "Watch yourself, Marshal," Judge Havemeyer said, color rising. "With respect, Your Honor, I am," Kane said, and it was not heat but weariness that roughened his voice. "Every day, while my people go to bed wondering what piece of themselves will be required next to satisfy one man who treats need as a vein to be mined." Harold Finch stood stiffly and cleared his throat. He had come to confess and could not wait for his name to be called, because sometimes truth, once decided on, burns a man from the inside if he does not open a window. He produced ledgers his own, kept secretly alongside the banks, figures double-entered and annotated with a neatness that bordered on holy. He spoke of shell loans and paper companies, of fees that ran like leeches, of sums juggled to manufacture a default. He spoke without flourish, which made his words land harder. He finished with a single sentence that sat quiet in the room like a weight set on a table. Mrs. Vance's seizure notice was accelerated 48 hours by direct instruction from Mr. Thorne to me. He stared at his hands. Under threat. Thorne's lawyer rose. He objected. He orated. He unrolled language like a fancy carpet in front of the court, words about custom and necessity, and the free market's hard but honest calculus. It might have carried, in another week, in another town, in a room where people had not stood up in the night and watched themselves become a crowd. Today it did not. Eleanor spoke last. She did not cry. She did not beg. She told a simple story about a house that needed repair and a garden that gave more back than it took. About a man who wanted the land beneath the house. About a woman who had hidden a small pistol not to kill anyone, but to remind herself She had not been put on earth merely to receive the choices of men. She said the word bastard once, did not hide from it, and then said child twice, with a love that bleached the first word until it looked like dust on a boot. When she finished, the room made the small sound that rooms make when many people remember they've been holding their breath. Judge Havemeyer cleared his throat too many times. He wiped his brow with a handkerchief as if logic might be coaxed out by friction. He looked at Sheriff Alden and did not quite meet his eye. Finally, in a voice that would have sounded stronger if not for the faintest tremor of fear under it, he said, "In light of fresh testimony, and while the court awaits further documentation from the bank in New Orleans, I find cause to stay all actions on the Vance property and to remand Mr. Silas Thorne to temporary custody on the narrow matter of attempting to accelerate a court-ordered seizure without proper filings." It wasn't the thunderbolt Kane had wanted. It wasn't nothing either. Sheriff Alden stood, came forward like a man clocking in at a hard job, and laid 2 fingers on Thorne's manicured wrist. "Sir." Thorne did not spit, did not curse. He looked at Eleanor, then really looked, and for the first time she saw something small and vicious behind his eyes falter, as if the beast in him had misjudged the size of the cage. "This is a pause," he said, very quiet. "Not an ending. Ends begin in pauses," Eleanor said. They led him away. The town filed out into the sun like people who had been underground too long. It was bright and almost indecent. Someone started to clap awkward, uncertain, and then stopped, embarrassed. Kane looked down at his hand and realized he was still holding his hat. He put it on and then took it off again because it felt wrong either way. Josephine squinted in the light. "Mama," she said, tugging Eleanor's sleeve, "are we poor?" Eleanor crouched until her eyes were level with her daughter's. She thought about lies, how they are sometimes kindness to children, and how sometimes they are the first taxes you pay to men like Thorne. "We are not rich, my heart," she said carefully, "but we are not owned." Josephine considered this with the seriousness of the very young. "Is that like being rich?" "It is better," Eleanor said, and believed it. Kane stood near, hat in his hands again, as if he could not decide who he was under it. He looked at her with a question that was not about law. She smiled back with an answer that was not words. The crowd thinned. Mrs. Peterson went ahead to start a pot of beans big enough to feed anyone who came by. Doc Miller promised to fetch bandages for the porch splinter ravaged. Mrs. Cafferty declared she would bring a pie because, as she said, justice works better with sugar. The town, in other words, remembered itself down to its ordinary bones. Back in the boarding-house parlor, the late sun ran a stripe across the floorboards the color of warm honey. Sarah sat with Josephine on the rug, showing her how to plait a length of twine into a horse's tail for a doll that had no horse. The windows were open. Dust motes drifted through light like tiny ships that had missed the harbor and were content to float forever. Kane stood by the mantel, studying the coal scuttle as if it had something to say. Eleanor stepped up beside him. For a moment neither spoke, as if silence itself were a friend who had been waiting its turn. "You kept your oath," she said finally, "to the law, to me, to this town." "It was the town," he said. "I only reminded it of its own size." She studied his profile, the set of his mouth, the place where a long-ago bullet crease nicked the line of his jaw, the eyes that held both yesterday and tomorrow in the same color. "I was afraid last night," she said, "not of you losing, of you losing yourself." She touched his sleeve. "You didn't." He looked down at the place where her fingers rested, as if the cloth might bloom with the warmth of them. "I almost did," he admitted softly, "when he said your name like that." "Do not let a small man deform a good man," she said. He breathed out, and the breath carried something away. He turned then fully, and the look they gave each other was not the bright flame of sudden rescue, but the deep-banked glow of a fire that had learned how to hold its heat. He did not kiss her. That would come later, clean and clear, when there were no eyes and no courthouse dust still in their throats. He only reached, with the same care he used to ease a frightened horse, and brushed a stray curl from her temple. "We're not done," he said. "He has money and men and spite. And if I have you," she said, "and I have me." She glanced toward the rug where Josephine and Sarah had now collapsed in a tangle of giggles. and we have them. Outside, the windmill creaked its old creak, faithful as a heart. Somewhere a hammer began to hit a nail. Jasper, fixing the front gate he had stood at like a general the night before. The town went on with the business of being a town. Evening came early, as it sometimes does after long days, and with it a weariness that promised sleep rather than dread. Before the lamps were lit, someone, Mrs. Peterson, likely hung a kettle of stew on the hook and set a basket of bread on the table. The scent filled the house. It wasn't celebration exactly, but it was something like it, the way a body hums after surviving a fever. Kane took the bench by the table and, after a moment's hesitation, reached for Eleanor's hand under the wood. She let him. He squeezed once an inventory of promises, old and new, and she squeezed back. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she echoed. And for the first time in too long, the word did not sound like a threat. The weeks that followed the confrontation with Silas Thorne were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The legal battle to secure Eleanor's property was swift, with Kane using the evidence they had uncovered to expose Thorne's criminal enterprise. The judge, shamed by his complicity and fearing for his own reputation, quickly ruled in Eleanor's favor. The property, a small, dilapidated homestead on the outskirts of town, was officially hers. The remaining bank funds, though meager, were enough to settle her debts. She was, for the first time in years, a free woman. But freedom, she quickly learned, was a complicated thing. The town's whispers, which had subsided somewhat after the dramatic showdown, returned with a new, speculative fervor. People saw her not just as the woman Kane Colton had saved, but as the woman he was now with. The single mother, the widow with a mysterious past, the woman who had brought a storm to their quiet town. She felt the pressure, the weight of their judgment, and for a moment her old fears returned. Maybe she should leave. Maybe she should take her daughter and start over somewhere new, somewhere no one knew her name. But Kane would not let her run. "They can talk all they want, Eleanor," he said one evening, his voice a low, steadying anchor. "Their words don't change the truth. You're a good woman. You're a brave woman, and you belong here. With me." His words were a balm to her wounded soul. He saw her, not as the woman everyone whispered about, but as the woman he loved. And that was all that mattered. Their life together began to take shape, a slow, organic process of two lonely souls coming together. Eleanor, with her quiet strength and gentle spirit, brought a warmth to Kane's home that had been missing for years. She filled the house with the scent of fresh bread and the sound of her laughter. Josephine, now fully settled and happy, had become a fixture at Kane's side. She would follow him around the yard like a small, watchful shadow, her small hand often tucked into his. Kane, in turn, had become a rock for her, a loving, patient father figure who taught her how to ride a horse and the names of the constellations. One night, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars, Kane turned to her, his face serious. "Eleanor," he began, "I know you're finally safe. You have your home. You have your freedom. But I have a proposition for you." Her heart fluttered in her chest. She knew what he was going to say. He was a man who acted with intention and purpose. "I'm not asking you to give up your freedom. I'm asking you to share it with me. I want you to be my wife. I want us to be a family, officially, properly. I want to build a life with you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. This was everything she had ever dreamed of, everything she had been told she would never have. A home, a family, a man who loved her for who she was, flaws and all. "Yes, Kane," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, a sigh of relief escaping his lips. "I've been carrying this ring in my pocket for weeks, just waiting for the right moment," he confessed with a grin, and kissed her, a kiss that was a promise of a lifetime, a kiss that sealed their love, a love forged in the fires of adversity and built on a foundation of trust and respect. Their wedding was a quiet affair, held in the small, quaint church in Redwood Spring. They exchanged vows, surrounded by their children, their few loyal friends, and the quiet blessing of the town's good people. Eleanor wore a simple dress, and Kane a new suit, but it was their eyes, filled with love and hope, that were the real spectacle. As they stood at the altar, two wounded souls, now made whole by a love that had grown from the ashes of their pasts, they knew that this was not just a new beginning, it was a new life, a life where they would face every challenge, every storm, together. And as they walked out of the church, hand in hand, the townsfolk, who had once whispered about her, now smiled and cheered. They had seen a woman with nothing but courage stand against a tyrant. They had seen a marshal, a man of honor, fight for what was right. And they had seen a love story bloom against all odds. Their story was a legend, a folk tale of the Wild West, a testament to the fact that even in the most desolate places, hope could take root. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. The years that followed were a testament to the power of a love story forged in the fires of adversity. 5 years later, the once dilapidated homestead was a sprawling, thriving ranch. The house, meticulously cared for by Eleanor, was a warm, welcoming sanctuary, filled with the aroma of home-cooked meals and the lively chaos of children. Josephine, now 11, was a bright, confident young woman, a testament to her mother's love and her father's guidance. She was her father's shadow, riding a horse with the same effortless grace, her small hands as comfortable with a rope as they were with a book. The ranch, now known as the Vance Ranch in honor of Eleanor's newfound independence, was more than just a home. It was a haven, a symbol of second chances. They had used the small inheritance from the bank account to open a small clinic for women and children, a place where women like Eleanor, who had nowhere else to go, could find a safe place, a healing place, a place to start over. It was their legacy, a quiet testament to their belief that a single act of kindness could change a life, could change a generation. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking kaleidoscope of purples, pinks, and oranges, a letter arrived. It was from New Orleans, addressed to Eleanor Vance Colton. The envelope was old and brittle, the ink faded with time. Eleanor, now a woman of quiet confidence, opened it with a steady hand. Inside, she found a letter and a small, leather-bound journal. The letter was from her father, a man she had mourned for years, a man she had believed to be a coward and a thief. The letter told a different story. Her father had not run from his debts. He had been a hero. He had uncovered a vast conspiracy, a plot to defraud the entire city. He had sacrificed his reputation, his family's name, to bring the criminals to justice. He had succeeded, but the cost had been his life. He had died a hero, his legacy redeemed by his sacrifice. The journal was a record of his journey, a story of a man who had faced his demons, who had fought for his honor, who had died a free man, a man who, in the end, had chosen his own destiny. Eleanor felt a quiet sob escape her lips. She had been carrying this grief, this shame, for so long. She had thought her father was a scoundrel. She had believed she was alone, but she wasn't. She never had been. Her father had been fighting a battle she hadn't even known existed. A battle of honor, a battle of courage, a battle of the soul. She walked out onto the porch, the letter and journal clutched in her hand. Cain was there, his arms around Sarah and Josephine, their 3 small sons playing in the yard. She saw him look at her, a question in his eyes. She didn't have to speak. He knew. He took the letter from her, his gaze scanning the words. "He was a good man, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft with understanding. "He did the right thing. He died a hero." And then, in a moment of stunning, breathtaking revelation, a realization that was as liberating as it was terrifying, Eleanor knew what she had to do. The past was no longer a cage. It was a launching pad. Her father had found his freedom. She had found hers. And together, they could do something more, something bigger, something that would honor his memory. She looked at Cain, a glint of adventure in her eyes. "Cain," she said, her voice filled with a newfound purpose, "I've been thinking. This ranch. It's a good place. But what if we did something more? What if we took all of this, all of our pasts, and used it to build something new? somewhere wilder, somewhere untamed, where we can truly start over, where we can truly be free. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. Cain looked at her, then at the vast, open plains, the endless horizon that stretched to the edge of the world. He saw the same hunger, the same wild, untamable spirit in her eyes that he had felt for so long. He knew what she was asking. She was asking for a new adventure, a new life, a new legacy. He had been a hero, a marshal, a father. He had found his place, but he had always been a wanderer, a man who had never truly found his home, until now. And she was right. Their love story, their Wild West love, was not an ending. It was a beginning. A new story, a new adventure, a new chapter in their life. A cowboy love story, a tale of two wounded souls finding a new life in the wild, wonderful West. A future filled with possibilities, a journey of healing and hope. And as they stood there, surrounded by the vastness of the prairie, they knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that their journey had just begun, and they were ready to write their own ending.